TNKR Media.
Lots to get to today. We're going to start with a bit of a chat about TikTok and social media regulation and how that impacts your business in just a moment. Our profile today is a family business, but a really theatrical, impressive family business. They go all over the world to design theaters and entertainment venues for big acts like Katy Perry, Celine Dion, Adele, and others. We'll be speaking with Olivier Berthiaume-Bergé, and Olivier is with Sceno Plus, so a Montreal-based company that, like so many in entertainment and tech, have been going global with their talent.
Yeah, Montreal continues to be a hotbed, and a lot of times, I guess what gets focused on is the technology side. But our contribution to the entertainment segment as well is phenomenal. It's not just Cirque du Soleil, and it's not just Celine Dion, and as we'll see from our guests coming forward, there's massive impact around the world in the work that they're doing. From I was going to say behind the scenes, but really it is the scene. So we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, sounds like they got some introductions as well from their clients at Cirque du Soleil and elsewhere who opened doors up really for Quebec entrepreneurs. That's a side story as well.
Yeah.
We'll talk about tax deadline season, of course, a big one for BDO to remind all clients about. The trust tax deadline is what we'll get to today with Peter Joseph Moraitis, tax partner at BDO, the capital gains exemption, as well as the transfer of businesses from first to second generation that is on the way. But first, as usual, current events. And lately, Mike, a lot of talk about media and social media, especially in recent days with TikTok, of course, being banned by the federal government. We kind of saw this coming. I mean, a lot of organizations were doing it privately anyway, especially in the States and in governments around the world. I sent out a memo to some clients that you received, and in that memo, I explained that basically at this point, as far as your IT processes, a lot of people are treating TikTok as malware. So you remember those scammy little programs that spy on your computer and all that, in the good old days, we managed to block most of those out with Norton and McAfee and other programs like that. But they're getting more sophisticated, and some of them are social networks. And so you have to be very conscious about the marketing tools that we use on a regular basis and why these banal videos, these fun videos, can actually imply a massive and potentially problematic transfer of data from your business to who knows who, anywhere.
Yeah, it's really a hot topic. When you can define something as malware or spyware, the names in and of itself told you exactly what the problem was. I mean, now you're getting into areas where you're talking about mainstream environments. You're talking about TikTok. You're talking about, taking what appear to be legitimate businesses or legitimate apps or legitimate, freedom of speech, and starting to create a concern overall. And I think part of the problem here lies in, TikTok is probably the biggest and the best example at this point, but this is going to come to a discussion at some point of, where's that line between freedom of speech and, the best interests of a company or a society or a government or whatever that scenario is. And I think that's probably where we're headed on this. And if we take a look over the last few weeks at, why countries moved away from banning TikTok is, TikTok, as some people may know, is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And many governments and corporations have been looking to ban it, or at least its access, saying that they may endanger sensitive user data. The White House has told federal agencies a few weeks ago that it had 30 days to delete the app. Canada and the executive arm of the EU have done the same thing, has to be dropped from your official devices. And as recently as March 2nd, the House committee in the US backed an even more extreme step, voting to advance legislation that would allow the president to ban TikTok nationwide. I can't even begin to think of what kind of commentary is going to come out of the U.S. Because let's say that this was not a Chinese-owned company. Would there be the same push? And I think this is where the problem is going to start coming in. You're going to get this cultural or country specific behind the scenes going on, and not necessarily from just the company itself. And I fear that, like the errant wind balloons that floated over Canada and the US a little while ago, which we were guaranteed were not spy data gathering devices, the US government in particular sees TikTok as a massive intelligence gathering operation. And again, the fear lies in the Chinese government's power over corporate China to call upon the Chinese companies when they chose to do so. If this was a Canadian-based company, would we be having the same conversation? And not trying to be political here, but this has a political undertone to it.
It opens up an interesting conversation about all social networks and where your data is going. And often we choose those convenient sign-in buttons, from Google, Facebook, or Apple. And the second you hit that button, you should know that your data is being transferred. It could be a foreign government. It could be private data brokers who are selling to Lord knows who. They may sell your data to law enforcement agencies. That's been known to happen. You're only limited by your imagination in terms of where the data goes. And so the best thing to do is to not give the machine, give the system, the network, any data which is sensitive or proprietary. If you are transferring any sensitive documentation through these social networks or publicly available drives or email servers, well, I mean, you have to know that there's a remote chance that might be made public one day. If you have an invention, if you have a proprietary technology, transferring that over some of these platforms may be a risky endeavor.
Yeah, most definitely, Dan. I think the transfer of data, trade secrets, and other kinds of secrets, I think, are really the basis behind the pressure that we're seeing from corporate Canada and America, or corporate Europe, as well as the governments, is a move away from allowing people the choice. And let's be honest, as humans, we're not terribly reliable, and our moments of weakness are frequent. I mean, we put locks on our doors in case somebody wants in. Well, what did we do when we put automatic locks, so when you left, nobody could walk in behind you? So in case you forgot to lock the door. Well, very similar in these situations too. I mean, we're human. We forget. There are things on our mind. We're going in 400 different directions. How many people have clicked on an email they shouldn't have? How many people have clicked on a sign-in button that they shouldn't have? And boom, before you know it, think somebody's taking advantage of the situation.
The other thing from a marketing point of view, Mike, that I want to point out, we do content marketing, of course. And so one thing that I've mentioned is some people say to me, well, do I have a TikTok strategy? And I say, no, you do not have don't have a TikTok strategy. You can have a video strategy, and you can apply that video strategy on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook video, Twitter even. LinkedIn now has a great live webinar feature. There's a number of ways to apply your video strategy to do good content marketing and PR. You do not need to have a TikTok focused strategy. It's not necessarily the way businesses are made. And if you put all your eggs in that basket, right? If you put all your eggs in one social media basket, and then they tweak the algorithm, and then you disappear, right? And then you're not as popular as you were, or perhaps it's regulated out of the market. So it's super risky to not diversify your social media content across many platforms.
Great point, Dan. I mean, you look at, if you go back 30, 40, 50 years, I mean, your marketing possibilities in Montreal, you use the Montreal Gazette or the old Montreal Star or the Journal de Montréal, and that was your choice. It was, print media. So it's the same idea. You wouldn't have advertised only in one market unless you're only going after a particular market. So I think the discussion of a social media marketing platform is much more relevant than a TikTok or a Facebook strategy or whatever it is. And I think I dare say that for more my generation, the TikTok strategy in their mind is the equivalent to social media strategy, but just don't necessarily use the right words along the way.
Mike, you wanted to bring up free speech as well, because the federal government is going to be regulating social media content to some degree in the next little while. And I'll save you the whole spiel because I have a whole lecture on this subject. As a media producer, I have very specific opinions about how to regulate media, and really don't think it can be done by government directly. That's a really bad idea for both innovation and for free speech. The ticket here and the system that has to be developed is a industry self-regulatory model. all these social networks have to come together, just like the broadcasters did in the early 90s when there was that social panic over national broadcast networks. We established a regime. We established a way for the companies to judge themselves and regulate themselves with standards and best practices. We established the rating system, G, PG, PG-13, etc. These are all concessions that were made together as a society. But right now, with social networks and politicians who are using them to their benefit in a very populist and I guess hyped up way, there's no appreciation for coming together at all. And we're becoming more polarized, and we're fighting over an issue that I think is pretty not easily solvable, but at least the solutions are there.
I totally agree. I mean, that there has to be an agreement across the board. The part of the issue and that complicates matters today is that everything that we're referring to, that we referred to in your discussion, is now such a global standard, right? And this is where the complication comes in to a certain degree. And, you're either going to ban TikTok or you're not going to ban TikTok. I think you're going to have a very hard time regulating, TikTok's influence when you
Welcome
don't have
back
any
to
real
Inspiring
control
Entrepreneurs
over it unless you're
Montreal,
gonna come to
showcasing
agreement with
stories
China,
from
what that looks
outstanding
like.
business
And
people
just to
by
give you,
BDO
a
Canada.
quick idea,
My name is
if you
Dan
look at
Delmont with
what's
Mike Newton of
driving
BDO.
some
And
of
our
the
guest, let's get
content
right to
discussions
him.
right
It's the
now
first
between,
Mike that we delve into the
on
world of
TikTok.
theater.
Again,
This should
this
be
is
really
very
fun.
political,
His name is
you got two
Olivier
nations that are
Berthiaume-Bergé.
jockeying
He's
for
the
influence on a
president
global stage.
and CEO
How
of
do you
Sceno
take that
Plus.
and how do
Olivier,
you place
welcome
that
to Inspiring
into
Entrepreneurs.
some kind
Thank you
of
for having me on the show, guys.
PG-13
First, tell me real simple, what is
logic-based
Sceno
environment
Plus?
when
So Sceno
people are
Plus is
actually looking at a
a
lot of this and
design
saying, hey,
firm that
is
specializes in
this really a TikTok
designing theaters,
issue?
whether they're
Is it a
for permanent
political issue?
shows or
And how do you
multi-purpose or any
regulate
type actually
how
of
do you regulate something
entertainment
in that kind of environment?
facilities.
I would also
So
note
we
that
offer
the Chinese
a
government
broad range of
regulates
services
TikTok
from
more severely
architecture,
for their
interior
domestic
design
consumption. So they actually have
to the
safeguards
most
in place,
specific
especially for
theater
children,
design
that
portion
limit
with
the
all the
amount of time and the
infrastructure, the
type of
specialized
content and the
equipment,
type of graphic
the
content
acoustic
that
and
they
the
have
architectural lighting. So
exposure
we're like
to.
a one-stop
And
shop.
we don't get that.
If
We get the
one of our
uncensored
clients
version.
wants
Well,
design
and that only goes to
So
prove our
where do you
point
get
even more,
involved in the
Dan, right? I
process?
mean, if
this
you're
is
going to control
not
it for
setting up
yourself
for
and
a
you're just
show.
going to
This
let
is
it go out
actual
there to
architectural.
everybody
This is
else,
actually
you got to
theater
think there's
creation.
an ulterior
At what
motive to some of
stages
this.
would you get
And I,
involved,
you
and
can
what kind of
fall
input
back
do you
on
have in the overall project?
So
protectionism only
I
so
would like to
much
say the
before this
earlier
gets raised
we
in a
come in, the
political
better,
context.
because
And I think this is the problem we're going
most
to
of the
have with
time, there's
regulating
already
social
been
media is,
a
we
portion of
can't
the master
regulate
plan that's
human
been
rights around the
allowed,
world. How the heck are
for
we
the
going to
programming in the theater,
regulate
and then
social
the
media
client wants a
content and how we
specific
use social
number of
media around the
seats
world?
there.
I'll be ranting about this
And we're
for
always up for
many
a
years to
challenge,
come
right?
until
But
it gets
if
done.
we get to
But
bring
industry
input
self-regulation.
during
Anyway.
the master planning
Coming up
phase,
next,
that's
Mike, we're going to
actually
talk
even
about the
better,
entertainment
because
business
we
and
can,
a Quebec success story that
make the
started
whole
locally
project benefit of
and
the
is now
synergy
all
of
around the world, producing the actual
existing
physical
facilities,
venues that
like
house
power
entertainment
plants,
acts like Cirque du
service
Soleil, Katy
lanes and
Perry,
all.
and
So you don't
others.
have to
We'll talk to Olivier
dedicate
Berthiaume-Bergé
everything
of
for the
Sceno
theater.
Plus
It can
next
be
on Inspiring
incorporated as a
Entrepreneurs
whole.
Montreal, and is now
But
all
yeah,
around
we're
the
also
world
used to be
producing
given
the
like just
actual
a
physical
sandbox
venues
of
that
whatever gets
house
left in the
entertainment
master plan.
acts
Say, hey
like
guys,
Cirque du Soleil,
design
Katy
a
Perry, and
5,000 seat
others.
theater
We'll talk
and
to
that
Olivier
footprint.
Berthiaume-Bergé
But yeah,
of
I
Sceno
would say the
Plus
sooner
next
the
on
better, but
Inspiring Entrepreneurs
there's
Montreal.
nothing we won't take.
Will you take an existing theater and redesign? I mean, we've all been to theaters for productions, for shows, and recognize that the acoustics may be a little outdated in some of these venues. I mean, one of your vision on your website is high quality, cutting edge entertainment venues that don't sacrifice functionality. Maybe give us a little bit of an insight into where that falls into your design process.
Yeah, I mean, a retrofit is always more of a challenge actually than a new building. We've been lucky enough to do one of our own initial designs. So for the Coliseum in Las Vegas, we designed and built it in 2002, and then we renovated it in 2019. So you're actually more aware of the existing condition. Because it's like when you buy a house and you start removing the floor and there's another layer of floor, or there's carpet, tiles, and then you have that wood floor. But yeah, it's part of the services that we offer.
Just going to say it's like the home remodeling tanka. Yeah, while I'm at it, well, let's just keep going and keep modifying as you uncover things, I guess, in the walls.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, to what extent do you want to keep what you have and make it better? Sometimes it's almost easier to start from scratch. We've had that with one of our clients where we were so far down into remodeling scenario and the increase in quality and capacity that they wanted was so big that at some point it's like you're almost like, narrowing the point where you want to consider maybe building something new. And when they did the pros and cons, it's okay, let's just go with your suggestion. But we're never gonna, bring it as the first option. But at some point, it's our job to protect our client against themselves and help them, find the best entertainment solution for their needs.
So there's designing theaters and venues like that. Tell me some of the other businesses, Olivier, that you tend to work with to create theatrical type environments.
Yeah, we in like year 2007, we were approached by a casino promoter, and he wanted to create sort of a new kind of casino and make it like really theatrical. So we approached it like we would approach a theater, like trying to make it flexible, functional. You don't have the sort of hard ceiling with the moldings and very, very bright lighting. It was really like open ceiling, and you could modulate it, and that was quite interesting. But besides that, we're really focused on entertainment venues, any type of them, but always, for thinking about the performers, the professional that are going to work there, so the technician, crews, and of course the guests.
It's interesting if you look and I think most people understand the concept, say, of a Vegas residency where a Celine Dion or somebody's going to move in for an extended period of time, and there's a lot of personalization. If the theater's already been built, then there's a significant amount of personalization that's going to come into play. How much does the actual artist have in design, or is this a little bit like Rihanna's Super Bowl where Willow Perron and Bruce Rogers did all the creative design, and how does that fit into how you have to work with the artist?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, talking about the permanent residency model, it's something that I like to think that we participated to create, because when we did the Coliseum in Las Vegas, it was our third venue that we were designing in Vegas. The first two ones were Cirque shows. So Cirque shows were about 1,500 to almost 2,000 seats. But the business model is that they would perform twice a night, one show at 7 and one show at 9. So when Celine came with Franco Dragon as her artistic director, it was clear that she couldn't perform twice a night. So we had to find a solution where we could, match the same numbers in terms of selling tickets. So we had to make the venue twice bigger. But at that point, there was not that many venues, or I don't think there were, in Vegas with that amount of seats. From the jump from 2,000 to 4,000 was kind of a leap of faith. But, through the years, the model made a name for itself. And now you have more and more of these either, long-term or short-term permanent resident shows. You have the Dolby Live also. The Coliseum picked up the model after Celine left and has a bunch of artists, doing shorter stays. And our latest venue that we opened, the Resort World Theater, is all about that. You have Katy Perry, Carrie Underwood, Luke Bryant, and it was supposed to be Celine, but Michael Bublé that are sharing the stage. But to go back to your question, yeah, we were pretty involved from the start with Celine and her production team to incorporate all of her needs into the design for the Coliseum. She wanted to be as close as possible to the audience. So instead of going in depth, we tried to really surround her, added a second balcony so that no one would be further than 120 feet. And for Resort World Theater, it was the same production company, AEG, that we had been working with Celine. So we were working heavily with the people whose job is like to convince these artists to come and perform there. So the Resort World Theater is not multi-purpose in the sense that the room can do a lot of different programming, but in terms of the type of production that you can put it, the stage, scenic machinery, and all that is super flexible. It's really a blank canvas for the artist and the producer, the production team to create, the show that they have in their head, and almost without limits.
It must be very interesting. I mean, one of the things that you guys talk about is the designing that takes the human experience in mind, right? I mean, that's what you want to express. Except we live in such a fast-paced world of been there, done that. That I mean, are you constantly required to update what that experience is capable, or is that really the artist's job?
I think it's a little bit of both. We have to be aware of, the always evolving technology, and what are the artists' needs. What are they going to be in 5 years, in 10 years? You don't want to invest, I would say 100 million in a venue that will be outdated in 5 years. So we leave room for improvement in terms of like the infrastructures, or to make it easy to improve rather than to have to demolish an entire wall to I'm gonna say something like to wire a new system or something like that. So we always make sure that in terms of capacity, the venue, and in capacity I don't mean like seated, but like it's not at its limit, that there's room to add. Like for example, for Resorts World, there's a audio and lighting and video kit that comes with the venue, but it doesn't take all the electrical demand. So each artist can bring their own stuff and add to that, but it's more than a basic kit. It's really a top of the line kit, but every artist has their specific needs. And in other venues that we build that are more like roundhouses, where the starting kit in terms of audio and video might be more basic, well, we just leave more room for every artist to bring their own lighting trusses, their own video wall, but the infrastructures are always designed to be able to supply that demand.
Olivier, during the pandemic, as all venues, of course, came to a halt. So the obvious question is, what was your pandemic pivot, and how were those first few months?
Yeah, it was kind of scary because it was a pandemic, but it was also the pivotal transfer from a generation to the other. So we went from let's say context where we had a lot of ongoing projects, a lot of future projects coming on. We were preparing the transition. So my brother and I were taking over from my parents. They were still involved in the company, but sort of fading out. And then this happened, right? So you start with the whole remote working and thinking about how are we going to survive this if this project stops and this project stops, and thinking about the hiring situation, and of course facing tough decision like who can we keep, who can we let go. And then the government comes back with some subsidies program, so that really helped us to maintain our core in terms of expertise. It didn't mean we had more work to be done. So that was the toughest part for me to say, hey, you're going to be working on that, and you're going to be staying home and not doing anything, but you're still on the payroll. Like it's hard. Like a poet once said, like paying a man to do nothing is the best way to kill him. Well, I mean, I sort of felt like that, but through the whole thing, it was very self-teaching moment. We were lucky enough to have one large project in the US that was already under construction, and they didn't really stop. So the tough part was that we were not able to go on site and travel. So but at least it kept us afloat. And then we picked up smaller projects. One of our clients was very aggressive in lining up their ducks to develop new project during the pandemic. So that was a big advantage for us. And I'm gonna say 6 months from today, it really started to pick up to a point where now we're quite busy. We have a bunch of new projects on the starting block, developing all potential new relation with new clients. So I'm grateful that it didn't all happen at the same time. Like that sort of forced pause that was created by the pandemic maybe gave my brother and I the time we needed to develop the maturity of transitioning, because I studied architecture, right? I'm not a businessman in the definition of the word. So I had more time to dedicate myself to looking at how the company is ran and asking myself those kind of questions. But what really drives me is, drawing and designing theaters. So right now I'm a lot into that, but it's good that I had that opportunity and time to sort of settle down on the other portion of what is my job today.
So it actually leads in, Olivier, to a very interesting question. A lot of times, a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of COVID have said, they've hit this point where, wow, they either learned something new, they modified something within their business that, wasn't all gray and gloomy as we all thought COVID was going to be. There was actually a lot of good things that emerged from that. Is the business acumen and the learning your pivot point, or is there anything else from a design perspective or from a creative perspective that really during COVID you had a chance to either modify or you had an epiphany going, hey, wait a second, we need to be taking this into account?
I wouldn't talk about an epiphany. Of course, the dynamic, the importance of online meeting, remote work, and all that has taken over. I personally still believe a lot in presential and being all in the same room for a brainstorm and making sure we're all on the same page. But in terms of logistic, of course, we probably travel like twice as less now than we did before the pandemic. So I just had a young daughter like about a year and a half ago. So I'm thankful for that. It gave me the time to spend with her while she's growing. But now that it's picking up, I'm not going to be nostalgic about that time during the pandemic. But yeah, it was more like an introspection, and it gives us maybe the opportunity to focus more on what are our values rather than just bring business to the table. And because we're I think all entrepreneurs are in business to do business, but there's something that's the first part. Why would you create your own business? It's to do something you're passionate about. And it really, enforced the notion that I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. And I'm not ready to just start doing something else because of whatever happens outside of Sceno Plus.
Yeah, I think a lot of people coming out of COVID I think there was 2 points you made that are very valid. One is if you were an in-person type of person before COVID, I can guarantee you're twice as much an in-person person today. If you were looking for a reason to work from home or to be remote before COVID started, you also were given the holy grail of excuses to continue to work in that environment. So that's changed a lot. It's interesting though with the conversation with a young child, and this really has come out on many occasions for a lot of people that would have been on the road significantly, that had young children. It's given them an opportunity to really experience something that not a lot of entrepreneurs were capable of doing before COVID.
Yeah.
So and I think one of the things, let's move over, let's shift a little bit here into family business dynamics. For those, this is radio, so nobody can see, but the family business has been around for 35 years. I can pretty much guarantee, looking at you, Olivier, you have not been running the family business for 35 years. You mentioned earlier that you've transitioned from your parents to your brother. And yourself, and this is a lot of times kind of the breaking point for a lot of businesses. Was there a plan in place when you guys decided to transition? Was this a very kind of formalized approach, or was it, your parents woke up one day and said, you know what, guys, it's time to take over?
No, it was, there was a plan. I mean, we are working with a consulting firm that specializes in, family-owned business transition, because in a lot of cases, you think it's just going to happen, and either the new generation or the people who are in place inside the business for a while are not prepared, or they don't have a training to how it's going to happen, then there's a lot of chance that it's going to fail. So we were working with them maybe a year and a half prior to the pandemic, and it was part of a plan, but the pandemic did, force that transition to happen faster. One reason, being the whole remote versus in presence. If I'm an in presence person, my father, I can assure you, is like 10 times more of an in presence person than you. And every time we still have, board meetings together because, they're not involved day to day, but they still have an idea of what's going on, and they play an advisory role to my brother and I. But he says, guys, I don't know how you're doing, like with those 2 days where people are working from home. Like, how can you know what they're doing? It's like, that it's okay. Just that's one of the reasons like that this happened. But it's also a bit sad because it happened in a moment where we couldn't be all there and make it like significant, as significant as a transition as we wanted. It kind of forced them out, and that's something like that I would like to have done differently. But this is what it is, and it was already, the gears were already moving when it happened. So it's not as bad as it wasn't in a flash either.
Real quick, Olivier, dispute resolution. If you and your family members are deadlocked, how do you get out of it?
Oof, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, it was tougher, I think, when we were all the four of us involved equally. Now that they sort of stepped out, we can disagree, but they leave it to us to make the final decision. It's also, the family dynamic has to play like that. Everyone's character is different. But if I can say, my dad was always the real entrepreneur, like started his business and he wanted to do one thing and nothing else. And whatever people were saying to him, he was very focused. Wouldn't hesitate to, step on people's head. And I'm not saying like here in Sceno Plus, but like when you're working internationally with, high level client and designer that I've seen why would I hire a company from Montreal to build my theater? And we came in like in Vegas with the Cirque du Soleil, and then sort of emancipated from them. So he had to have that sort of he's gonna hate me for it, but shark mentality.
Type A personalities. Type A personality.
Yeah, that my brother and I don't necessarily have, but having spent 15 years designing theaters, I'm in control of my subject, and that's what shows. And I'm still the guy behind the computer who can like validate whether or not we can raise that level by 1.5 meter. Can we move those VIP here and there? Can we add 500 more people? So I have that proximity with the work that's being done. And I think in-house, when we have like staff meeting and we're working on producing a presentation document, I know the tools they're going to use. I know the steps that are involved. So I'm able to inspire respect and rather than command it. And I think that's one key point. And going back to your question, or I don't know if it's going back to it, but one of the other thing was like working with people that are like 15 years older, 10 years older than you. And one day you just like, you become their boss. That was something that we prepared also with that consulting firm. And now those people, they're the pillars of the company really with Vincent and I. So they have a role that goes beyond the role of an employee.
I will, just to finish this off, Dan, I will say, Olivier, we could have an entire show on that discussion of taking over with people that are significantly older than you and have been around, and how do you generate respect and how do you generate tolerance and understanding in a multi-generational environment if they're not even your family and they've been, loyal to your parents for so many years, and you come in as the kid. How do you move into that role? So I'm sure that's always a challenge in any business, and I would think even more so in the type of business that you're in.
Well, I think if I can just speak briefly to that, the key was like the first 15 year, starting from the bottom and making my sharpening my tools, and for them to see by their own that I can bring something to the table. That really helped me because they knew that the role I play in the company is important. So it's not just like, hey, from now it's going to be, Olivier that's going to be in charge. It was never like openly out there, but everybody, I guess, kind of knew it.
Our guest, Olivier Berthiaume-Bergé, President and CEO of Sceno Plus, and we'll have his one piece of advice to inspire entrepreneurs in just a few minutes. But first, let's get to our expert, Peter Joseph Moraitis, tax partner at BDO Canada. It is tax season, March, of course, and we'll have lots more in the coming weeks. But let's begin, Mike, with trust deadline. And this applies specifically to family business. And of course, welcome back, Peter.
Thanks, Dan, for having me on. Yeah, so when I thought of the guest Olivier and his family, and we're right in the middle of March, which is a a busy tax deadline for trusts. I thought it was something good that we could talk about. So any trusts that are created are automatically required to have a December year end, and they have 90 days to file, which depending on whether it's a leap year ends up being March 30th or 31st. So it's a very short time frame. And of course, trust is something that we hear a lot about in the news, but in the family business, in the privately held companies, it's a very valuable tool that could be used to structure the ownership of a business. So a family trust usually involves an estate freeze, where we determine what the value of the business is from the older generation, the founders, where they would go and freeze their interests that they hold directly as owners of the corporation. And the family trust will be introduced as an entity, a separate entity that would hold the shares that would grow in value. There's many different benefits. One of the benefits is that a family trust on an exit of the company allows the ability to multiply the capital gains exemption. So in Canada, on a sale of a privately held business, the first approximately almost $1 million now is tax-free. It's something that's it's like a policy from finance to kind of promote entrepreneurships. And a trust is able to allocate proceeds of the sale, the future growth, to different family members, whether they're in the business or not. And if they receive the proceeds from it, they would be tax-free.
So interesting though, Pete, because one of the things that people don't always recognize is the discretionary ability of the trusts, which, if I go back to your discussion of multiplication of capital gains exemption, means that you can flow it out to many family members. Now, that also includes minor children under 18 years old. So if you have a family trust that has yourself and your spouse and your 3 kids in it, you can basically move around $5 million worth of capital gains under the proper scenario. Sounds great, but it's not so simple when it comes to trying to pass that on to the kids, because there are a few rules you got to look out for.
Correct. No, it's what's really that scenario works, which is why we kind of also as soon as there are other family members, it starts to become something to consider. But it is something that's got to be money that will be credited to them and owed to those kids, even though they're minors, and something that most likely will just be invested for their future. And that's where the term trust fund baby kind of comes out a lot in the news, where it is money that needs to be with them. But it does allow flexibility when there's not a sale, which is kind of in situations where Sceno Plus, it gives the ability where you don't know which child is maybe older or not. What do they want to be in the business? Do they change their mind? That's why one of the biggest benefits from a tax point of view of transition is shares that are held by a family trust have you're saying, the discretion to be allocated, distributed without any tax consequences to those children at a certain time, and in the proportions that are determined at that time in the future, based on how things have evolved in the business. So it could be that, for the time being, until there's a full transition, finalize, they're held in this family trust, and all the increase in value that would have been had a higher tax consequence if they were still held by the founder are now distributed to the younger generation without any tax implications.
But I think the important element for our listeners to understand is again, that key word of discretionary. Even on the capital gains exemption, that ability to pass it around, use my example of, your spouse and your 3 children, you do not have to allocate that capital gain to a child. I mean, this is really where the functionality and I guess the fluidity of cash flow is an important element for the beneficiary, or more the executors on the trust, to determine where those funds get distributed for various reasons.
Correct. The actual founders could remain beneficiaries as well. And sometimes, there might be an exit too early. There might be the amount that's actually sold is maybe not enough for what the person needs for retirement, and, not in the position to have that money parked in a trust or in a child's name for the next 15 years. So 100% there's that flexibility. So this is trust deadline, and there's one thing on a couple shows ago, our colleagues Julie Cote was discussing a new tax for residential properties, and I really wanted to just bring this up because this 1% tax on unused properties was something that was really meant to be focused from non-residents or non-citizens. It's really like to kind of lower the speculation involved in the market. But there is a form that's issued that needs to be filed by April 30th. And despite the fact that there are you can have a family trust or even a Canadian corporation that is completely only Canadian trustees and beneficiaries, under the current rules, those entities, if they own a home, if they own a condo, if they own any plex that's under 4 units, they're required to file this form even though they're exempt from any of the tax. And there are penalties for this form if they're not filed. So this is kind of something that the form was only released, I think, 5 or 6 weeks ago. And it's something that everybody who kind of owns any residential property, even if it's rented or even if it's, they're completely Canadian, it's something that's going to need to be considered.
So another potentially well thought out idea that was not executed so well. That doesn't sound like anything that we're used to around here.
Correct.
Anyways, Pete, again, great subject, great topic on somewhere between the trust deadlines on the technical with a really practical approach on the discretionary and the multiplication of cap gain. So thanks a lot. Now we'll let you get back to work so you can do all of these trusts that you have to get out by the end of the month.
Perfect. Thank you.
Peter Joseph Moraitis, tax partner at FL. He's already turned around and started typing away. And
yeah.
He's back to work already.
I think he just ignored us, Dan.
Thanks, Peter.
All right.
And as we come to the end of our show, let's turn to our entrepreneur, Olivier Berthiaume-Bergé, President and CEO of Sceno Plus, and ask him for his one piece of advice for inspiring entrepreneurs. Olivier.
Yeah, I mean, when you ask yourself, why did you become an entrepreneur? I guess, further than having a business model and being able to keep it up, it's not losing sight of why you're doing that. Like what made you start that business, and try to hold on to that. You have to be passionate about it. It's not just about making money, because I think that's the best way to be very unhappy. And I would say also to follow your instincts. There's a reason why you did this and no one else did, and you have to hold on to that, and don't second guess yourself. I mean, listen, but in the end, you're responsible for the decision you make, and you're gonna make the right decision for yourself and for your business. And the last one may be a little bit corny, but is keep enjoying what you're doing. Keep having fun. Whether it's being the entrepreneur or doing the work that made you become an entrepreneur, you have also to hold on to that, because we don't work to be happy. We're happy, and then we have to work, but it's not. It can be what's fueling your happiness. There's bigger things than work in life, even if it's part of it. So I guess that would be about it.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivier. And Mike, a great plucky Quebecois company that made the case due to their passion, their competence, that they belong on the international stage.
Most definitely. I think we forget, we talk many times on this show about the technology in Quebec and in Montreal. We have a very, very influential art component around the world. And yes, you'll think of Cirque du Soleil and you'll think of Celine. But, when you think about it, it's guys like Olivier and his family who are the backbone behind that might not get the press, but continue to show really how strong and how forthcoming and forward-thinking Quebec continues to be on an international scale.
Olivier Berthiaume-Bergé, President and CEO of Sceno Plus, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
And Mike, next week we have a very interesting guest. We'll be chatting with Franz Saint-Elemy. He's the CEO of LetterTech and also the Chancellor of Université de Montréal, as well as the founder of Groupe 3737, which is an incubator for Black entrepreneurs. And so Chancellor Saint-Elemy is with us next week. A reminder, you can subscribe to Inspiring Entrepreneurs Montreal as a podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or your favorite platform. And you can also log on to the website inspiringentrepreneursmtl.com for hundreds of local entrepreneur profiles. See you back here next week.
This has been a production of TNKR Media. Good talk.